What is going on, everyone? It's your boy Luke here for our preview for the WGC Dell match play, which is certainly a different week, a lot of strategy to touch on, and in general, just we're going to be talking about how you construct your lineups, probably more about more than who you're actually playing this week. So let's go ahead and hop right on into it. First off, with just a little bit of a review of how this golf tournament is going to work. So I'm going to go ahead and get the sharing on my screen working for this golf tournament here. And what we're going to do is we're going to go through the bracket, talk through who I think some of the favorites out of these groups are going to be. And then we're going to talk through the DFS poll in terms of salary, construction, and all that sort of fun stuff, and give you guys the goods. So that's what we're going to end up doing here. It's going to make me actually... All right, so we're dealing with the same technical issues I was dealing with a week ago. So I'm going to leave the stream running. I'll be back in literally 15 seconds with the stream and whatnot. I'll be able to share my screen. And then we'll go ahead and hop right into the player poll. So just give me 1 second here, guys. I'll be right. All right, we're back. Hopefully this will be able to work for us this time around to be able to share my screen because, of course, that is vital, and it's working. There we go. So cool. We have the screen shared here, and what we're going to do is I'm going to organize this by group, and we're just going to go group by group, kind of talking about some of my favorite plays on the slate. So let me go ahead here, sort this by group. We'll put it in ascending order to get it there in numerical order for all of you OCD people out there like myself. But all right, so we're going to go group by group. The way that I'm doing this, my player pool is going to be about 45 to 50 players in the field. So much larger in terms of percentage of the field than most weeks. You know, typically I'm looking at right around 35 to 40% of the field in my player pool. This week it is going to be closer to 60, 70, maybe even 80% depending on what contest you're in. I'm 150 maxing. So as of right now, I have 48 of the 64 players in the field in my player pool. So a vast majority of them in there. And that's because you can afford to do so, right? It's a smaller field. You're looking to get as many bullets in that contest as possible. And you're going to have to construct them in a very specific way, which we'll get to here in a second. So actually, let's go over to the bracket to show you what I'm talking about. It'll be easier to visualize this whole thing over here. So this is the bracket for this golf tournament, guys. And like I said before, there's 64 total players. So the actual bracket portion isn't going to start until Saturday and Sunday. And right now, players are broken up into pods of 4 players. They're going to play each other over Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. So 1 match per day, round robin style, to determine who makes it to the knockout rounds. The pods are already set. The positions that these pods will be selected into are already set. So that means that there won't be any type of reseeding after the group round or anything like that. So we kind of know who's going to be playing each other based on who's coming out of certain pods. So at the top left, you have pod 1, which faces the winner of pod 16. Over here, the whole way down here, it's vice versa. I believe it's like pods 8 and 9 are playing each other. So your usual setup for a bracket type of format. And what we're going to do here is we're going to go pod by pod talking about who I'll be playing, because for the most part, it's 2 or even 3 players out of every pod that I'm considering. There's 1, maybe 2 players in every pod that I'm excluding from my player pool, and that's how I'm attacking this golf tournament. In terms of general strategy, the main reason we're bringing this up is you have to make sure that your lineups have a chance of getting 6 out of 8 players in the quarterfinals. So when you get to that Elite 8, you need to be able to get 6 of these 8 slots. So obviously you have 1 slot here, 1 slot over here, 4 on each side, of course, the 2 down here as well. And obviously there's going to be 2 that you can't get. The way that you can get 6 of the 8 in the final 8, so in the Elite 8, is to make sure you don't take players from adjacent pods. So of course, if you take 2 players from the same pod, they have no chance of getting out of the same pod in the group stage. If you take somebody from the pod adjacent, they end up winning, getting into the round of 16. Then they're playing each other and cannibalizing each other's production before you can get to that Elite 8. So in terms of making optimal lineups for this week, the only real thing you have to make sure you avoid is, again, taking people from the same pod and then taking them from the pod adjacent. So making sure that you have this bracket up when you're building your lineups this week. You're keeping that in mind. If you're making lineups on an optimizer like I will be, because I'm playing 150 lineups, you're going to have to set a rule in your optimizer. However, you go ahead and do that. Some of them set it via player. Some of them set it via attribute, that type of thing. Mine's more of an attribute type of thing. I can just set group numbers, right? I can say, don't play anyone from group 1 or group 16, because that's how my optimizer works. I flag it by group. a little bit easier. If you're doing it on Fantasy Crunch or one of the more conventional forms of making 150 lineups, just make a group for each one of these sets of 8 players. So for John Rahm, Reed, Cameron Young, and Sebastian Munoz, put them in a group also with Brooks Koepka, Lowry, Varner, and Eric Royan. Set those 8 players in the same group. Set it to play a maximum of 1. So you'll do that for that set of 8 players up top. You'll do it for this set of 8 players with these third and fourth group, so on and so forth for all 8 pods across the tournament. So as long as you set those groups, or again, in my case, if you're using more of an attribute-based set of 150, just make sure that you're setting those groups to not be played with each other. In general, there's a few other things you could do to optimize. I don't think you have to, though. You could try to make it balanced. So you try and take 3 players from each side of the board. That way, you're going to have 2 of them at most that'll be playing each other on one side of the board. That way, it's not 4 and 2, where you could have, the 2 guys obviously on the one side getting out, playing against each other, those 2, but then 2 guys on the other side, both on the same side. That way, you can only have 3 in the final 4. So there's actually a way where you can build quote unquote optimally, but yet still only get 3 out of the final 4 in. So you want to make sure you're avoiding those type of lineups where that kind of thing can happen. So that's also the other rule that you want to set. You don't want to have 4 players from the same side and 2 players from this 2 set of adjacent pods from the other, right? As long as, you can have the 4 on one side, you can have one up here on the top side and on the bottom side. That way you can still get all 4 players into the final 4. So it's a weird week, guys. I know that was a lot right there, but again, if you're playing on an optimizer, just set those 8 pods like I talked about. And then when you're actually going through your lineups, make sure you don't have any of those weird situations where the 2 guys will be up there on the top right and could potentially cannibalize each other. Let's go ahead and hop into the player pool now, though. This will be a little bit easier to talk through. And again, we're going to go pod by pod. I think it's the easiest way to do this, and just talk about the plays that I'll have in my player pool and the plays that I'm going to be fading for the week. And ownership this week, by the way, I calculate my own ownership. I don't use other sources and whatnot. It's all over the place. I've looked at some of the other sources. There's projections that are very close to mine and some projections that are just wildly off, right? So no one really knows who's going to be the chalk this week. But the one thing I can tell you is that John Rahm was the highest owned player last year, and he was 19.8% owned in the large field contest in the $25 GBP to first. So the chalk of the chalk is going to be somewhere in that like 18 to 19% owned range. So you can see the chalkiest player on the slate as of right now is Xander Schauffele at 21.4%. Justin Thomas at 20.4 is also up there. He's one of the higher owned plays on the slate. But you're not going to get that guy at 25-30% this week, which is surprising when we only have 60 players in the field and the average ownership is going to be right around 10%. But that's just a byproduct of the format, the specific lineups that you have to make, and all that sort of fun stuff. We'll catch up on chat, see if anyone's down here. C. Gianni says, what's going on? Hopefully you're doing well this Tuesday evening. A little bit of a different time for this live stream. Chris Palmer said, what's up? Everyone hit that like button. Couldn't agree anymore. Make sure you guys go ahead and do that. As always, if there's any questions that you have throughout the stream, do not be shy at all to ask away. I can touch on players. I could touch on strategy notes. Whatever you guys want to talk about. It can be for cash contests as well. We'll talk about that a little bit later. We'll definitely touch on whatever you have for us. So let's go to pod 1. Pod 1 has number 1 in the world, John Rahm. Of course, anytime you have John Rahm in your group, it's going to be a tough ask to win. So, of course, he's in my player pool. He was the only number 1 seed last year to make it through group play, which isn't surprising. He's got the moxie when it comes to this type of format. He's that fiery attitude. He's a great putter. He's got the all-around game that we're looking for. The match play record speaks for itself. He's 10-6-2. He's won this event before, or came in second place at this event. I know he at the very least had a runner-up finish. Let's go ahead and double check that because I'm almost positive that he actually won. No, it was a runner-up finish. Okay, so he ended up losing over there in 2017, his first ever trip to this event. And then, of course, last year finished in the top 5. So he has elite course history here. I don't think we have to fade him. He makes quite a bit of sense. I have him winning the group 40.8% of the time. So he's far from a lock, right? That's less than half the time that he's going to be winning it, which means that guys like Patrick Reed and, believe it or not, Sebastian Munoz are going to be intriguing for me this week, particularly if Munoz is going to be 5.4% owned. I mean, that's pretty trivial ownership right there. Patrick Reed at 8% is also much lower than he should be. Of course, he's shown some prowess over his career in this type of format, 8-7-2. More notably in the Ryder Cup format, where he has a much better record. Sebastian Munoz, he did go 0-3-0 last year, so he lost all 3 of his matches. That, of course, is far from ideal, but at the same time, he's a streaky player, and we see that wacky player every single year go out there and make it through this stage. Now, the popular pick in this group for an upset is Cameron Young, but as always, with this week, you got to be different. You got to be able to fade some of that chalk, and this 7.4% number I have on Cameron Young could very well be low. I see across the industry, there's some places that have him projected closer to 13 to 15% owned, and personally, that's where I expected him to come up in my algorithm, right? It's not something that I change myself. I let the numbers do the talking. So wouldn't be surprised if he came in maybe even double where I have him at projected at in terms of ownership. So somebody that I'm going to be steering clear from just because we haven't seen him in this format before. We know he's a really solid off the tee player in terms of his distance, but with accuracy, he can certainly lack from time to time. And at Austin Country Club, that can get you into trouble. And of course, he deals with a shaky putter. I mean, he's been good over the last 2 or 3 events, but to begin his career on the PGA Tour, the reason why he was missing cuts is the putter sucked. Like, he was completely hemorrhaging strokes to the field with the putter. So I like what we've been seeing of late. I think Cameron Young is a bright up-and-coming player. I just think this type of format might be a little bit too much for him at this point of his career. So I'm focusing on Munoz, the very high upside play there. Patrick Reed at $7,500 definitely makes some sense with his track record. And of course, number 1, World John Rahm. Cameron Young kind of is just the guy left out, right? It's not like I don't like the guy long-term. Certainly think the guy has some real game. Moving on to the next group, the fade is going to be Colin Morikawa. So Colin Morikawa's group is going to be playing, let's see, so I can get this right. They're going to be playing the Answer, Simpson, Harmon, and Watson group. So they're the group on the top right of the bracket. So this is a group of players that, of course, is very strong, but whoever ends up winning this group is also playing somebody that's going to be an extremely strong player. So this is borderline group of death territory. The group that I'm talking about, just to give you an idea, is group 15 down here. It's Answer, Harmon, Simpson, and Watson. This is one of the hardest groups to determine. It's not like they're all like 9 or 10K players. You can see they're all in the 7K range, but they're all 7K range golfers, especially Webb Simpson, who's intriguing because of the recent form. But Harmon, Answer, and Bubba have great track records over here in match play. So I like group number 2 here, but I do have my concerns with their path to the final 8 or even to the final 4, having to go through one of those guys. If I'm going to take anyone here, it's going to be the underdogs. I wouldn't necessarily consider Sergio Garcia to be an underdog because he is relatively chalky. He's $8,300, has one of the best match play track records in the entire world. Jason Kokrak and Robert McIntyre are, of course, talented players. I mean, Robert McIntyre, as soon as he dedicates himself to the PGA Tour, he will become a world-renowned player. And Jason Kokrak, of course, has won 3 times in the last year and a half. So they're high upside plays that I'm certainly willing to go to. Both good enough putters as well for this type of format. Going down to group number 3. So group number 3 will be playing the winner of, let me make sure I get this right. So that's the Victor Hovland group. Victor Hovland's group is going to be playing the winner of Neiman, Na, Henley, and McNeely, which is an extremely weak group. So whoever ends up getting out of group 3 here is going to have a really good path to getting to the Elite 8, which makes this group especially important. Which is why I'm a little bit surprised the ownership is where it's at, right? Cameron Tringale is at 5.1% over here. You have Sepp Straka at 8.4%, which I may actually end up having in my player pool. I have him down as a blank right now. But Will Zalatoris at 10.8%. That is just egregiously too low. This is somebody who's got the moxie we're looking for. I talked about as a sleeper pick on the channel today. Approach play is there. The off the tee play is there. He can definitely be accurate when he needs to. Just clubs down off the tee, takes that 3-wood, splits the fairway all day long. And Cameron Tringale, I have an outright bet on. I hate the guy. He's somebody who has definitely cost me my fair share amount of money when it comes to my DFS lineups, but this just seems like a place that he could win. I mean, he's always playing well when he comes to Texas. This is a course that's short. It prioritizes accuracy. You got to be good with those irons. And of course, in match play, putting is the real X factor. That's how you win these type of tournaments. And Cameron Tringale can get nuclear hot with that putter. So I'm not saying it's going to happen, but I have just this really strange feeling that Cameron Tringale wins this thing. So I've put an outright bet on him. He's going to be in my lineups about 15 to 20% of the time this week. And overall, I'm probably going to end up having Sepp Straka here too, because Victor Hovland, many of the studs up here in this tournament are going to be fades for me this week. I mean, Colin Morikawa is going to be a fade. Victor Hovland is going to be a fade. Let's point a few of the other ones out. Dustin Johnson was borderline somebody I changed from a yes to a no. As of right now, he's in my player pool, but I'm fading Bryson DeChambeau. We're going to be fading guys like Adam Scott. Billy Horschel is going to potentially be a fade. Daniel Berger may be a fade for us. Let's see. Brian Harmon, probably going to be in my player pool. I have a hard time deciding there with group 15, but you guys get the point. 4 or 5 of those guys up top just aren't going to be in my player pool, period. So a lot of times it's going to be these sleeper picks that come through at this golf tournament. Last year, like I said, only 1 of the number 1 seeds out of 16 ended up making it through. Now this year, I would expect that to be closer to 5 or 6 at the very least, at least a fourth of them, right? They're the best players in the world. They should win their groups more often than not. But at the same time, if you're taking all of those guys up top, or even half of the guys up top in your player pool, you're probably doing yourself a disservice because a majority of them probably aren't making it out of group play. And Victor Hovland and his putting that can be suspect at times, also that around the green play, that is not ideal for match play. Again, a lot of the winners that we see at this event are guys that are really well-rounded, that have that short game. Kevin Kisner, Matt Kuchar, Billy Horschel for that matter, just not necessarily the skill set you think of when you go to somebody like Victor Hovland. I like the more stroke play formats, right? Patrick Cantlay, Sungjae Im, Keith Mitchell, and Seamus Power. Every single one of these players is capable of winning this group. I think that Patrick Cantlay, if he gets out of this group, has a really good chance to win this golf tournament. He has one of the easiest paths of anyone in the tournament to get to the Final Four. So just to give you an idea of how easy the path is, let me go ahead and find it here. This whole bracket thing's hard to find people on it because it's a very small bracket I have on my end. So Patrick Cantlay, he's at the bottom left. So that group is going to be playing the winner of Trohan, Daniel Berger, Siwoo Kim, and Bazane Hoot. So, of course, that's probably the hardest match he's going to have, is going against Trohan or Daniel Berger. But after that, it's going against guys like Billy Horschel, Thomas Peters, Hoagie, or Minwoo Lee. Not really anyone you have to worry about. Ian Poulter, of course, past his prime. I still like him this week, but he's not the best player on here. And then Scotty Scheffler would be the only other guy he has to go through to get to that Final Four. So there's realistically like 4 players out of those 16 players that he has to worry about down there. So it makes it one of the more favorable quadrants to get out of. So it's really why I like all 4 of these players. They're all also seemingly good fits for match play. All good putters. I mean, Sungjae Im, Patrick Cantlay, Seamus Power, some of the best putters on the PGA Tour, and all relatively decent drivers. I mean, especially Seamus Power, who's turned it around over the last 2 or 3 months. All these players are gaining significantly off the tee. The only real issue I can poke with any of them is Seamus Power is inconsistent. Keith Mitchell deals with issues on approach from time to time, so he certainly has to bring that to the table. Sungjae Im is sometimes just too consistent, right? Sometimes he's not putting enough birdie production to get the job done. And whenever he is putting up that birdie production, sometimes he's a little bit too sloppy. So he's also inconsistent, kind of like your Seamus Power. And then there's the all-around machine in Patrick Cantlay, who when he misses cuts or he goes out there and doesn't finish in the top 10, we're surprised. So he's a core pick for us. I don't think we need to talk about him all that much. But yeah, I can't decide between these 4 players. So it's the one group that I'm playing all of them. If you felt the need to take somebody out of this group to fade somebody, I guess it would be Keith Mitchell or maybe Seamus Power. But I really do like Sungjae and Patrick Cantlay there. Moving on to group number 5. This is one of the groups of death for sure. It's quite a bit of ownership here, which kind of surprises me. Typically, when we have a super strong group, when you have names like Poulter, Fleetwood, Fitzpatrick, and Scotty Scheffler in the same group, typically people don't like playing that group, right? You want to avoid that. You're like, oh, I don't know who to take from it, so on and so forth. But 20% on Scotty Scheffler, we have 9% and 7% on Tommy Fleetwood, which for guys in that 8K range, that's pretty decent ownership levels. And even Ian Poulter at 6.2% is getting his fair share. So I will be on 3 of them. You can say I like Poulter, Tommy Fleetwood, and Scotty Scheffler. Matt Fitzpatrick, he deals with issues with the around the green from time to time. So that might end up costing him against these other players, which are extremely well-rounded. I mean, Tommy Fleetwood's one of the best around the green players. Ian Poulter has been the best around the green player for quite some time at this point. And Scotty Scheffler, he's a gainer in all 4 major statistical categories as well. So I just worry that he's running into a buzzsaw here with just the very well-rounded skill set of all 3 of those players. So this is probably the hardest to read group out of all of them. So also you can say I don't have Matt Fitzpatrick down as a no. So there's a chance I end up playing all 4 players from this group as well. But again, the winner of this group will eventually have to face whoever ends up winning group number 4. So you don't want to be playing these groups together, obviously. And when you're making lineups, you'll notice that they're at that type of thing. So they could cannibalize each other is what I'm trying to say there. But it at least would be getting into the Final Four. They would meet at the Elite Eight at the very earliest. Moving down to group number 6, it's another really tough group. When we get back to these higher numbers, 10, 11, 12 towards the back 9, I guess we shouldn't call them the back 9. We get the point. The back side of the bracket, it tends to get a little bit weaker. These groups right here, 4, 5, and 6, are what I would say are the strongest groups here. And a lot of that comes down to seeding. It makes sense. It's like a normal seeding bracket. You use Jon Rahm, and then you take the lowest seed, which I believe was Sebastian Munoz. And then you add in 2 people in the middle, which Patrick Reed and Cameron Young, you can see they were towards the middle of the odds board, towards the middle of the world rankings. That's why they were matched up with Jon Rahm. Whereas the group that they're matched up with over here, group 16, is the other end of the spectrum, right? Brooks Koepka was the last captain. I believe he was number 16 seed over here. Shane Lowry was, the next highest guy. I believe he was number 17. So you get matched up with number 16. So they do it in bracket format, which means that the groups 4, 5, and 6 have the most well-rounded rosters. So it just makes sense. They're in the middle there. So guys like Justin Thomas, Kevin Kisner, Mark Leishman. The only guy I don't think could win this group would be Luke List. So that's why he's the only one that's not in my player pool. But the rest of them all very live to do so. Solid putters with Kisner and Mark Leishman. Justin Thomas has been a solid player over the last month or so, but he is the guy that I will be fading here. I talked about it during the video today. I mean, he just doesn't have the best skill set for match play. And you can see that he has a losing record for his career, and he incorrectly gets touted as being one of the best players in the field in terms of match play. So not somebody that I'm looking to play. He just doesn't have the skill set for this. Even if he gets through the group play, which I have him doing that 26.8% of the time, which is same as Mark Leishman, actually less than Kevin Kisner. I have him getting out of the group actually a little bit more. That doesn't give him a guarantee at all to make it to the Elite Eight. As soon as he runs into one of these elite putting performances, it might not matter how close he's hitting it to the hole, right? If the other guy's making those 10 to 15 footers all day, it's going to get extremely frustrating for Justin Thomas, who sometimes has a hard time getting in those 5 to 6 footers. I can see we have a question down here about Lee. So I'm not sure if you're talking about Minwoo Lee or Lee Westwood, but make sure to ask me when we get close to the group that we're talking about. We're going to go group by group. So I'm here with group 7 right now. Minwoo Lee is in group 12, and I believe, yeah, and same thing with Lee Westwood. He's here in a little bit. So go ahead and clarify who you're talking about, and then I'll cover them when we get to the group. We'll talk about group 7 now, which has relatively weak players in it. I mean, Tony Finau coming in with dreadful form. I don't think anyone's going to be playing him this week. Takumi Kanaya is kind of an unknown prospect. Of course, the number 1 amateur in the world at one point. He's kind of on a very steep ascent through the world rankings, so definitely has some talent. He's a winner at some of those international tours. I definitely think this is a little bit of a too big of a step up in competition for him. So I'm going to be using a wait and see approach on Kanaya. So him and Finau going to be out of the player pool, but I don't mind going to Lucas Herbert. Of course, he's looked sharp at the API. He made that run on Sunday, nearly ended up winning the golf tournament. At one point was 4 under par. I believe he finished at 3 or 4 under par, finished in the top 3. Then you have also Xander Schauffele. He's probably a favorite play on the slate. I have him winning his group 49.2% of the time, so nearly half the time. That's by far the highest number in the field. And a lot of that is due to the competitors, right? Takumi Kanaya, I only have him winning it about 9.9% of the time. So it's not impossible, just extremely unlikely. And even the next best stud, Tony Finau, I have it 26.6%. Here, one second. You didn't want to hear that. That was a nasty cough. I'm going to need to get a sip of water here in a second. So after we finish here with group 7, I'm going to go grab a glass of water and come right back. But in general, this is the easiest to read group out of this bunch. So, of course, expect there to be madness here. Expect Kanaya to somehow end up getting out of this group. But realistically, well over half of the win allocation here is done between Schauffele and Lucas Herbert. And given Tony Finau's recent form, which is factored into the win group rate, but also a lot of the historical stats are given into the group win rate, his true rate's probably closer to 15%, right? Given how he's looked of late. I mean, the guy can't putt. The ball striking hasn't been there for Tony Finau. So I am comfortable feeding 2 players out of that group. In doing so, that does give me an ability to stack up 4 in those 2 other groups, right? When I'm having a hard time deciding between the 4 stud players that are in the same group there, by taking only 2 in certain groups, it gives me the ability to do so. So that is one of the groups where I'm going to be doing that. It's catch up on chat. Then I'm going to grab that glass of water because I do need to get that. Chandler said he's talking about Minwoo Lee. Took about a month break, losing to join Discord again. Looking to join Discord again, so I just signed back up like normal. Yes. So if you stopped your subscription on Discord and you're on the Patreon, then yeah, you just join on Patreon, and then there'll be a link on Discord on Patreon at some point to join the Discord. I'll do that after I get off the stream here. Actually, I'll do that because there was a few other people that joined over the last few days, and then you should be able to join back up. Yeah. So Chandler, just message me on any of my social media platforms if that's giving you any trouble or whatnot. But I'll definitely be able to get you set up there after we get out of here. So give me 1 second, 30 seconds to grab a glass of water, and we'll finish up with the backside of this bracket. Alrighty. Got ourselves some water. We're good to go. So, all right, let's talk about Group 8, which is also another hard one to read. I mean, Matthew Wolff's pretty easy to roll out here because of the recent form. You've actually even heard quotes from him of late saying that he's just trying to find something with his swing. So I would be steering very clear from somebody like Matthew Wolff. But DJ, I also heard something not so good from him today. So he was trying out a few drivers with Adam Scott, and they actually switched drivers. They switched putters for whatever reason. I guess they were just doing some type of like a stunt for social media and whatnot. And Dustin Johnson hit a drive with Adam Scott's driver. It actually cut, and he looked at Adam Scott and said, wow, the ball cut. That's not good to hear because Dustin Johnson, the last 2 tournaments, has not been able to get his ball to cut off the tee. And to hear that as soon as he hit someone else's driver just shows that he's dealing with all kinds of issues off the tee. It's mental at this point. He's pretty much given himself up to hitting that driver. And Dustin Johnson not gaining a ton of strokes off the tee is a recipe for him to have a really bad week. So I thought I was going to be on him. This yes is very close to becoming a no. I mean, as of right now, I just need to have more players in my player pool. And I don't really want to be playing Justin Thomas. I've talked about how the skill set isn't really there. I don't like playing guys like Victor Hovland, Morikawa for the same reason. They also deal with some of those short game woes. So as of right now, he's in the player pool, but I could very well see myself mitigating a lot of my ownership from Dustin Johnson and maybe giving it to somebody like Colin Morikawa, hoping they have that really hot putting week. So we'll have to see with Dustin Johnson. I'm actually going to go ahead and change him down to a blank here. And I saw that piece of content about an hour before we got on the stream here, and it really wouldn't have meant anything to anyone out there if you weren't watching him as closely as I was the last 2 weeks. All of his shots weren't cutting, and he was just missing left and right. He was playing army golf going left and right because when he thought it was going to cut, it wasn't. He was missing in the left rough. And when he would just try and hit the straight ball, that's when the ball would cut. He hit it way into the trees on the right. It's why he really blew up last week at the Valspar Championship, why I ended up missing the cut there, or just having a bad week in general. Can't even remember if he ended up missing the cut, but in either circumstance, Dustin Johnson's just not looking good with the off the tee play. Let's look at the shots gained metrics just to get an idea. So Dustin Johnson, he's in the $10,000 range. So he's gaining off the tee and gaining on approach, right? But it's not the Dustin Johnson numbers that we're used to seeing. He's typically closer to half a stroke gained on approach, closer to half a stroke gained off the tee. Around the green's never really his forte, and the putter's starting to come back to earth. You guys remember over the last 50 measured rounds, in fact, we can probably just check this to look at it. Look, he's gaining close to 0.64 shots gained per round. That's really what was carrying him with a lot of his play because the off the tee play and the approach play really wasn't there. It was close to a quarter of a stroke per round. And now the putting is starting to tail off, and the ball striking numbers aren't all that much better, right? About a tenth of a stroke better per round off the tee. That's troubling to me. But of course, to hear that quote where he's like, oh, wow, look, I finally hit a cut. I don't like to see that at all. Confidence is a player's worst enemy. And Dustin Johnson, he doesn't really have the mental makeup of somebody that plays well at this event either. You don't like players that are aloof, that don't care. You want players that are extremely invested into every single shot. So again, the more and more I talk about, the less and less I like Dustin Johnson. So as a result, I still like Max Homa and Mackenzie Hughes. They'll be in my player pool no matter what. But if I end up not playing DJ, I'm going to like them even more. Max Homa does have the makeup we're looking for. He played pretty decent here last year. He went 2-1. I believe ended up losing in the playoffs, so he didn't end up making it into the playoffs. Mackenzie Hughes did make it into the playoffs last year, won his group, ended up losing in the first round, so that's why he's 2-2-0 there. But a very solid performance for the Canadian. He was a huge underdog to win his group last year and has the short game that we're looking for, right? He's got the putting, the around the green play. He's relatively accurate off the tee. So it does fit what I'm looking for there. And Matthew Wolff, like I said, just in dreadful form. I'm not necessarily sure I could go there. I just think that he's he's a little bit too risky of a proposition, right? This is an event where weird stuff happens, but there is a limit on that. You're not going to do things that are just irrational. Let's move on to group number 9 now. Group number 9 has Bryson DeChambeau, which makes this an interesting group to target, especially because Bryson DeChambeau is a huge question mark. We don't even know if he's going to finish this golf tournament. And I've heard a few people floating around the idea that Bryson DeChambeau tees it up for this event and ends up withdrawing, because this is a WGC event. And as long as you tee off the first tee, you are guaranteed a payout. So there's a chance that Bryson DeChambeau plays his first match. If he ends up getting stomped like I think he will, again, he hasn't been playing competitive golf for quite some time, he could withdraw, which means that Taylor Gooch, Lee Westwood, and Richard Bland would get an automatic DQ win. But they would not only just get an automatic DQ win, they would get the 18-hole bonus. So they would get the 3-hole win in a bonus in a row. So they would get, it's like an extra like 5.5 points. Plus they'd get an extra 1.8 points times 18 holes, because they wouldn't even play any holes. So he would get about the highest score that you could possibly get for a match here for this format for 3 players in this field. Then you have guys that are in a 3-way tie to try and get out of a group, right? So their win percentage would go from like 38% to 50% for Taylor Gooch. You'd have over a 35% chance of Lee Westwood getting out of here. I mean, even Richard Bland would have a really good shot of getting out of the group. So as of right now, I am focusing on Lee Westwood and Taylor Gooch. I think they have by far the best chance of getting out of here. And Taylor Gooch is going to be chalk, but he's chalk worth eating. And I say chalk in quotes because the public isn't going to know to play Taylor Gooch. I mean, this is a highly strategic event. The only reason he's such a great play is because of the guys priced around him, right? And people that aren't keen to this format, that aren't looking into the numbers as much of a lot of us out here aren't going to know that he's going to be chalk. So I say chalk in quotes. A lot of people in our industry will be playing Taylor Gooch this week, but you can say I only have him at 12.1%. That's more than reasonable. The average ownership for a player in this field is right around 9% ownership. So that's only 3% higher than the global average. Definitely somebody I'm willing to play. In terms of points per dollar, one of the highest projected owned plays, not owned plays, one of the highest projected plays on the slate. And at $7,700 is a core play for me this week for sure that I won't be backing down off of. Let's go ahead and catch up on the chat here. C. Gianni says, what do you think about Koepka's path to victory? So yeah, we'll talk about, actually, did we skip over Koepka, or is he coming up? He's coming up. So we'll talk about him when we get down there to the last group. He has one of the easiest roads to victory at the golf tournament. So C. Gianni, that's a really sharp take. We'll definitely talk about that for sure. He's in my player pool as well. He's definitely one of my favorite sneaky plays this week. Bondrific says, when you join back up, just scroll down Luke's Patreon page and there's a link. Perfect. Yeah, dude, there's already one up there. Sometimes it expires. I believe they only last for 7 days. So that might be the only issue with going to that one. So again, Chandler, if it ends up not being up there, I will post another link for you, but go ahead and see if that one will work. It might not. And Chandler says, can you explain how the group things work? Yeah. So yeah, we'll talk about that. So, and you said Gooch is 0-3, and for people who are like 2-4 and 3-2, so you're talking about their records last year. I mean, yeah, dude, you got to consider the group, right? Last year, Gooch was in an extremely difficult group. This year, he's a group with Bryson DeChambeau, who might withdraw, Lee Westwood, and Richard Bland, right? He should be a sizable favorite in all of those groups. In fact, he's the Vegas favorite to win his group. So he is actually plus 200 to win his group. He has one of the best odds of anybody in the event to win his group, other than Xander Schauffele and John Rahm. So yeah, man, it's all relative, right? So you can see a guy being 0-3, but then you can see guys that are like have a huge sample size of being bad, right? Like Justin Thomas is 8-10-2. By the time that Taylor Gooch has 14 matches played, or in that case, upwards of 20 matches played, he might be like 15-3, right? He may go on some crazy winning streak, right? So it's a small sample size. That's not really something that I'm looking into. And then the group things work. I kind of mentioned it before, so you might want to just go back to the beginning of the video just to get a better idea, because I explained it for about 10 to 15 minutes. I'm not going to do it again here, but in general, you don't want to be playing guys that are going to be in the same group for round one, obviously. Of course, in the group stage, you don't want them to be in the same group, and then you don't want them to be playing each other in the group of 16. So you're going to be setting 8 groups with the 8 players, so the 4 in their own group and the 4 in the group next to them, to make sure you only play 1 out of that set of 8 players. And again, there's going to be 8 groups that you do that for the whole way across the bracket. So like I said, I explained that in full detail at the beginning of this. So just go back, check that out. It explains it in better detail for you. Chris Palmer says, do you like this cash lineup? So let's touch on lineups at the end, because I have to be able to check where they are at the bracket. And we'll touch on cash in full detail at the end. So I want to be able to give you a full answer there, Chris, and it's just not a good time to go over that right now. So we'll touch on that at the end. Just remind me your lineup because I do have to go through the bracket. We got to strategically make sure that it makes sense because for cash, I'm using a much different strategy than I am for GPPs and cash. There's a good argument to be made to take 3 guys from just 2 groups, to take 3 guys from let me go ahead and show you on the bracket because this is an interesting point that I actually saw another creator talking about today, and it convinced me is for cash, right? You're just trying to get like 1 or 2 guys through. If you get 2 guys through to the group of 16, that's going to be enough to cash in the top 50% of contests this week. In fact, getting 2 through the group of 16 might be enough to cash in GPPs this week. That's the kind of week that it is. It's very difficult to get 2 guys through the cut. You got to think there's a 1 in 4 chance of getting somebody through the group stage. You only have 6 slots. That means that on average, right, theoretically, if every player had a 50% win rate, or I guess out of the group a 25% win rate, you'd be dealing with 1.5 guys through every single lineup. That means that if you got 2 over, you'd be in the top 50 percentile at least, if not higher, based on how your players get through the other rounds, right? If they end up getting to the quarterfinals or semifinals, you're pretty much guaranteed to be cashing in a large field GPP. But in cash contests specifically, the type of strategy I'm talking about would be to take 3 players from the group up here. So just like take John Rahm, Patrick Reed, and Cameron Young in a lineup and match them up with somebody like Lowry, Varner, and Eric Van Rooyen. So as long as one of those 3 players in each of those groups ends up getting through and they end up playing each other in the group of 16, you're guaranteed somebody in the quarterfinals. You're also guaranteed 2 people to win their group and get you a ton of points that way. And you're guaranteed wins against each other during the group stage. You're going to, at the very least, have a 50th percentile type of lineup. So I know we did a little bit of a side. I didn't really want to do that here at this point. So we'll touch on that there at the end in full detail. But for cash, that's what I'm going to be doing. So we'll touch on that, Chris. It's much more detailed than I can touch on right now. So that's why I wanted to tell you that. But we'll do that at the end, man. Completely different story for cash. Completely different thought process this week. So we'll have to get to that. But Alex Noren at $7,800. I like him as a sleeper for Group 10. We're going back to GPP mindset here. I like all the players in this group, so it's one of the few groups I am considering playing all 4 players in. Paul Casey and Louis Oosthuizen have both been pretty solid with their match play records. You can see for their career, both a large sample size. Alex Noren, also a massive sample size, arguably the best match play record of anyone. But Corey Connors 0-3-0. He's going to be the guy that no one wants to play, right? He's in a group with 3 quote-unquote match play stalwarts. And these are the exact kind of groups where that kind of guy wins. We saw it last year. Guys like EVR took down the quote-unquote group of death last year, ended up being that sleeper pick that you had to have to win GPPs. Corey Connors could very well be that guy. He's got the ball striking we're looking for on Bermuda grass greens, specifically these hybrid greens that we get at TPC Sawgrass, PGA National, some of these very specific golf courses. That's where he does his best putting. In fact, over there at the American Express, PGA West for the stadium course, that's where he set his record for shots gained in an event. So there's something about these hybrid greens that gets Corey Connors moving. So I can't fade any of the players in this group. One of the rare groups I will be playing all 4. Again, it's a borderline group of death right there. Group number 11 is also a strong group, but two players that I'm really focusing on. A lot of it's due to the putting, right? Adam Scott deals with the putting yips from time to time. He's been more solid over the last month or so, but ended up seeing some of those yips the last time out, which is kind of concerning. And then there's Keegan Bradley, who I was on for the last month. I faded him last week, and he ended up missing the cut as chalk. So I have a pretty good read on Keegan Bradley in general. He doesn't have the putting that I'm looking for at this event. Of course, he's got the ball striking numbers. He's going to keep himself in play, but the real question mark is he going to make those 5 and 6 footers for par all day to keep himself in the golf tournament? I think that Jordan Spieth is the more than likely winner of this group. You can see Justin Rose is the other guy I'm considering. He's the second best putter in the group. So that's why he's the other guy that I'm considering there. Now towards the last 4 groups here, this is where it starts to get pretty weak. Outside of group number 15, they're all kind of groups where anyone could win, especially here with group number 12. It's by far the weakest out of the bunch. You have Thomas Pieters, Tom Hoge, and Minwoo Lee, and then Billy Horschel. I'm just betting on one of these underdogs. I think that Tom Hoge is going to be a chalky play as well. I have him at 12.3%, which, again, it's chalky for somebody in the 6K range, but it's not all that bad, right? You can play him in 30% of your lineups and still get plenty of leverage. Thomas Pieters, a high upside play. He's played here quite a bit. He's 2-4-3, so not the best record historically, but he has made it out of the group stage before, so he has that experience in the playoff bracket. And Minwoo Lee, he's never played here before. Same thing with Tom Hoge, but both really high upside plays. They're streaky players, especially Min-Woo Lee. He went on a streak earlier this year in the European Tour where he had a few wins, a few other top fives, and ascended into the top 25 of the world rankings. Right now, you believe he's like number 40 in the world rankings or something like that. And in terms of official World Golf ranking, he is certainly underpriced at $6,100. I believe he's had a rough go of it over the last month or so. I know he missed a few cuts on the PGA Tour, for the European Tour before the last 2 to 3 weeks break that they've had. I don't think he played that well either. But if he can turn it around, we saw somebody like Antoine Rosner last year end up winning his group. So why not Min-Woo Lee? And he's a much bigger name than somebody like an Antoine Rosner. So if somebody's going to go out and do that this year, I definitely think that he's more than reasonable to go out and do that. Daniel Berger at $9,800. Now we're moving on to group number 13 here. This is another tough group. I'm really focusing on Terrell Hatton. He's the one stud in this group that I'm taking. Christian Bezuidenhout is perpetually overrated. He went 0-3 here last year, and he reminds me of one of those guys that's just aloof, right? He's not really that engaged with his play. He never really gets that excited, and I hate to harp on that so much, but that matters here. The guys that have that edge to them, that competitive fire to them, I'm one of those people, right? I get really into things when I get competitive, and I can just tell you that you can feed off of that adrenaline. When you're one of those people, that elevates your level of play. It's why guys like Kobe Bryant, these clutch players and across a variety of different sports, are able to do well in crunch time. It's because they thrive on that type of energy. You see that with Justin Thomas, which is, I think that's why he has the reputation that he does, especially at the Ryder Cup and President's Cup, because he takes himself to another level. Unfortunately, though, Justin Thomas couldn't give a crap about the match play. I do think that's why you see different versions of Justin Thomas. I mean, he has a losing record at the match play here, but international play, he's one of the best players in the world. So it's different on a player-by-player basis, but Bezuidenhout, he doesn't seem like somebody who's going to amp himself up regardless of the situation. I mean, even when he went over there on the European Tour multiple times in a row, he won in South Africa, then he won on the European Tour. I forget exactly what golf course is that, but it was the week after that. He looked like he didn't care, right? So he looked happy, but he didn't look like he was that excited about it. So I'm going to take a wait and see approach. Daniel Berger has a horrible record at match play. So if you're going to find any reason to fade him, that would certainly be it, but might still end up in my player pool. We'll have to see. Just when you have 64 players total in the player pool, you can only fade so many people. I mean, I'm actually having trouble adding players to my player pool this week. It's usually the opposite, right? Usually we're having to find people to fade. This week, it's actually just not finding enough people to fade. Moving on to the group number 14. It's another interesting one. The only real fade's Russell Henley, because Russell Henley's another one of those aloof bastards that looks like he couldn't give a shit out there on the golf course. He blows away leads. You can tell his mental game isn't really there. I mean, just think of the Sony Open this year. I mean, oh, geez, over there at Waialae. Oh, boy, that was not a good showing for Russell Henley there on the back nine. Whereas guys like Kevin Na, extremely fiery. I mean, the guy's not going to give you a 2-footer unless he tells you that it's a gimme. Joaquin Niemann's a fiery character. The guy has definitely got the mental game we're looking for. And Maverick McNeely might be the dark horse of the tournament. And I'm not telling you he's going to win this thing. I don't think that's possible. But he's somebody that could certainly get to the Final Four. He definitely has that type of upside there. So it's $6,200. I'll be playing McNeely, Knott, and Joaquin Niemann. And Russell Henley being 13.2%, like I get it, right? He's projected to win the group more than anyone else here. A lot of that comes down to the recent form metrics, the shots gained approach. But you can't tell me that he's twice as likely as some of these other guys to get through, right? He's not twice as owned as them, but he's 5% more owned, which means that you're looking at him winning at about 40, maybe 45% of the time to be paying that off, whereas in reality, it's close to 30%, right? So Joaquin Niemann, Henley should be close in ownership. There's a clear gap there. And even these guys like Kevin Na and Maverick McNeely that are only right around like 20% win rate, in terms of the ratio, that's too big of a ratio between them. So I do like those plays there, and you're going to have to find people to fade. And for me, Russell Henley, it comes down to the mental game. These other guys just have their head more on straight. Group number 15, like I said, is extremely competitive. It's not the strongest group. I mean, the highest priced guy is $7,900, but good luck trying to decide between them. As of right now, I have Abraham Answer in the player pool. Same thing with Bubba Watson. Bubba Watson has a ton of experience here as well, over 21 matches for his career. But Ryan Harmon, also a Bulldog, right? He's 5-3-1 for his career. He is in great recent form. He finished top 5 last week. Made a few cuts coming into the event as well. The only one I don't like is Webb Simpson. A lot of it comes down to the health. A lot of it comes down to the match play record as well. He's one of the few people that's not just bad here. He's been bad for a long time, right? It's not just like somebody like Zane who's 0-3, who we can kind of give a pass to, right? I mean, there's guys that are 0-3 that I'm playing, right? Like Taylor Gooch. But when a guy's 2-8-2, it's been like prolonged issues, prolonged areas of him just not being able to get wins in match play. That's a real issue. So I don't like the 2-8-2 record. Of course, a lot of the injury concerns as well. So you would think that Webb Simpson would be lower owned. You think people would be a little bit more cautious to go out and play Webb Simpson, but that is not the case this week. So I'll be going to the other three. I pretty much might as well just put Brian Harman down as a yes. I'm almost certain that he'll be in my player pool. Now let's go down to group number 16 here. This is another interesting group. I wanted to talk about the path. I know someone mentioned it before. I believe it was C. Gianni. So Brooks Koepka, he's going to have to play Jon Rahm if he wins, right? So that's the real issue. His group of 16 matchups likely to be Rahm. If Jon Rahm gets bounced, if it ends up being Munoz, Young, or Patrick Reed, then we're talking. Then it's going to be an easy path because then after that, you're dealing with the Bryson DeChambeau group. We've already talked about how Taylor Gooch is the betting favorite to get out of that group, and he's the number 2 seed, so that should tell you everything you need to know there. And then the Dustin Johnson group is the other group you could have somebody come out of, where he's dealing with his issues off the tee. He's somebody that he's going to be a fade for me this week now. Again, he went from a yes to a no because of some of the comments today. He has a realistic shot if he can get past Jon Rahm. So that's the caveat that I wanted to talk about there because that's a huge if. Right? Jon Rahm was the number one seed to get through last year. He's got the perfect skill set for this golf course, this type of format. And there's no one in the world in terms of mental makeup that I would rather have at this golf tournament, maybe other than Tiger Woods. And he's not going to be playing the match play. So Jon Rahm, the next best guy in terms of mental makeup. And I know he looks childish at times, but if you're looking for somebody to be truly invested into every shot, to will shots into the hole, he's your guy. I mean, you saw it at the Ryder Cup. He made some putts there that had no business at going in. The guy looked like an unstoppable force. Until Scotty Scheffler ended up taking him down in singles, the guy was a world beater at that event. And he could very well go out and do that this week. And that's the only issue for Brooks Koepka. That's the only thing I'll say. Because other than that, right, look at this group. Eric Van Rooyen, he won the group last year, but he had no business doing so. I doubt he does so this year. He's in my player pool, though. You know, he has the upside. Harold Varner III, I talked about as a sleeper pick. He's got a perfect skill set for match play, so it'll be interesting to see how he fares. He's 0-0. He's never played before. And then Shane Lowry, I don't know why he's not a yes. This is actually a mistake, guys. So anyone over there on the Patreon, I am going to have to re-upload and fix this. Shane Lowry is definitely a no for me this week. He's 2-7-3 for his career. He's extremely chalky. I have him at 14.5%. And he's playing in a group with players that are arguably better. I mean, Harold Varner III has been on scorching hot form. He had that win over there at the Saudi as well. And Eric Van Rooyen, he might not be in super hot form, but he's only $6,500. He actually got through his group last year. And then you have Brooks in the group, who has a winning record for match play. If there's any format that's going to make Brooks excited, that's not a major championship, it's this type of event, especially because it's only a few weeks before Augusta National and the Masters. I really like what I'm seeing out of this group. So he's going to be the one fade there. That is a mistake. Again, anyone on the Patreon, that will be uploaded after we get off of there. But those are the players that I'm looking at, guys. I believe this is 47 players in total. I did have Lowry counted on there, so it's not the 48 that I thought before. And in general, like I said before, we're using the group strategy, right? We're going to make sure we're not playing players from the same pod of players, so from the same group, but also the group that they'll be playing against. So make sure you're looking at the bracket. Make sure you're doing all that sort of fun stuff. And what we're going to do now is go and make some lineups, which is going to give you guys some insight into the lineup making process for this week, which is definitely going to be a little bit different, right? We're going to have a bracket up. We're going to have to be switching from tab to tab to make sure that we're doing this correctly. And like I said before, there is that one very specific circumstance you want to avoid where you're dealing with all 4 players on one side and then the other 2 playing against each other. Which I'm going to go ahead and show you what that looks like, because that's something that I haven't seen any other creators talking about and could create some real issues when you're making your lineups. So let me go ahead and share my screen here. And just to show you what I'm talking about, alrighty, let's show you on the bracket. So what I was saying before is, right, you want to make sure that you're playing players that aren't playing from the group adjacent to them, right? So it's realistic that you could play somebody from this group of 2, this group of 2, this group of 2, and then this group of 2 over here on the left, right? So you could have 4 players playing on the left bracket that could all realistically make it to the Elite 8 right, for these 4 slots. And then your other 2, you could be playing in this pot up here and this pot up here. Now, the issue with that, right, is that you're going to have at most the 2 from the left getting through because they're going to be cannibalizing each other. And then these 2 playing in the same pot over here are going to be cannibalizing each other again, which means you have at max 3 of the final 4. I can't believe that no one else is talking about this. There's some really big YouTube channels out there that just seemingly don't understand strategy and the fact that that can still happen. This is why you can't have 4 on the same side, because you leave yourself open to that, right? So if you're going to just make those 8 groups, at least keep that in mind and make sure that you're not having that happen to you. The easy fix for this is just make sure you don't take 4 from the same side, right? Make it 3 and 3, which sure, there's a chance that the optimal lineup this week ends up being that you have 4 on one side, the one up top and the one down here. But do you really want to go through every single lineup if you're making 150 this week and make sure that that doesn't happen? That's probably going to take you a few hours. For my peace of mind, I'm just putting 3 on each side. It makes that impossible to happen. There's no circumstance where you can run into that type of issue, which again, I don't understand how this isn't a bigger talking point this week, because it's more than realistic for that to happen, right? Like, to make a lineup for that to happen, all you have to do is take the 4 from one side and then make 2 of your value picks from the same quadrant over there. And that would cause you a lot of issues, which again, I don't know why that's not talked about more in the industry. That's going to cost some people some money this week, I can tell you, because a lot of those bigger channels have not talked about that. And I'm all for it, right? If there's going to be like 10% of the field that makes their lineups incorrectly this week, and so be it. I won't be part of that 10%, that's for sure. So let's go ahead and start making a lineup. So the best way to do this is actually go by the bracket. The salaries are going to be kind of an afterthought at this point, because leaving salary on the table also something that I'll be doing in quite a few lineups. So let's go ahead and start in the top left. We're going to go ahead and take our winner for the final 4 to go ahead and construct this lineup in every single quadrant. And then we're going to round it off with 2 value picks to round out the spots in the Elite 8. So for the top left, of course, Jon Rahm's probably the number one name that comes to mind. But like Gianni was saying before, Brooks Koepka looks pretty damn good. And I think that as long as Jon Rahm gets bounced during the group stage, he has a really good shot at getting out of that top quadrant there. So the first name in here is going to be Brooks Koepka. He also gives us quite a bit of flexibility with the rest of our spots because he's relatively cheap. So let's go ahead and put him there at $9,400. Let's go down to the bottom left quadrant now, trying to find our second man in, which my favorite option down here, I like Tyrrell Hatton. I think he makes some sense. I mean, Patrick Cantlay, if we can afford the salary, would be ideal. But since we already took Brooks Koepka, might be a little bit too rich of an asking. So for me, it's between Tommy Fleetwood, the second, he would be the second option. Number one option would be Tyrrell Hatton. So let's go ahead and see if we can fit Hatton. Because we're already taking Brooks Koepka and he's not a 10K option, we should certainly be able to fit both of those guys in there. That leaves us with $7,800 remaining per player. And at this point, we filled up at least the 2 sides, ideally, for the final 4 there. Now on the right, let's go ahead and do the same thing. So from the top right of this bracket, my favorite plays there, Abraham Answer, he makes some sense. Same thing with Bubba Watson and probably Alex Noren and Paul Casey. And I think all 4 of those plays are extremely reasonable. In fact, in this top right quadrant, it's where I have by far the most exposure. I have all 4 of those players over there with the Louis, Paul Casey, Connors, and Noren group. I have most of the players other than Webb here in the group up here. So let's go ahead and just add Alex Noren. He's a little bit cheaper. He's also going to give us some salary flexibility. So I like adding him in there. He's $7,800. Now let's do the bottom right quadrant. So the next guy I really have my eyes on, I mean, Justin Rose, like I said, he's relatively cheap. He's also going to be relatively low owned. If I wanted to add a stud, Bill Zalatoris makes sense, but because we're left with $7,800 remaining per player, I'm not sure we have enough room for that. So let's go ahead and add Justin Rose in here, who's $6,900. So that leaves us with $8,300 for our last 2 spots. And again, I want to leave salary on the table. This is for a large field GPP. We're trying to make sure our lineup is contrarian. And last year, the winning lineup had like $46,000 in salary, had like $4,000 in salary left on the table. In fact, that was the optimal lineup, not the winning lineup. The winning lineup was different than the optimal lineup, but definitely important to look at both of those. So let's figure this out. So we've already taken Brooks. That means that we can't take anybody here from Jon Rahm's group. So if we're going to add anyone from the top left quadrant, it would have to be one of these 2 weaker groups. Taylor Gooch makes a lot of sense. Again, we talked about him having one of the highest chances of actually winning his group. And he would, at the earliest, end up beating Brooks Koepka in the quarterfinals, which is what we're looking for. So let's go ahead and add Taylor Gooch in there. So add Taylor Gooch. So that means now that we have 3 players on the left side. And now over here on the right, we did make sure that they were in both quadrants. So if we wanted to add the 4th player from the left side, we could get away with it, right? Because we made sure that we kept them outside of the same quadrant. Again, one was from up here in this, I shouldn't say quadrant, I guess the 8th of the bracket, right? This 8th of the bracket and this 8th of the bracket are where we took those players on the right side. So we could get away with taking all 4 players from this side, but let's not do that. Let's keep it balanced, right? Let's do 3 and 3 for this one. So on the right side, a player that makes some sense. You can take a look at this group up top. Yeah, because we ended up adding Alex Noren in there. So we can take somebody from one of these 2 groups. Brian Harman makes some sense. Bubba Watson makes sense. We could go to Jason Kokrak or Sergio Garcia. So let's see how much salary we have left. I believe it was like $9,000. So if we were to take $8,300 Sergio Garcia, that would leave us with $700 on the table. And this is exactly the kind of lineup I expected myself to go to. It's leaving quite a bit of salary on the table. It's taking guys that are all spread out across the board. You're not going to be dealing with anyone meeting in the Elite Eight. And of course, you're dealing with guys that have high winning percentages for their groups. I mean, Taylor Gooch, very much so underpriced for his winning percentage. Sergio Garcia, one of the best match players in the world. Maybe the only question mark here is Justin Rose, right? So if you wanted to upgrade Justin Rose, we could try and go ahead and do so, which Jordan Spieth would be the ideal candidate, but do we have enough money for Jordan Spieth? Yeah, not even close. I don't know why I thought we'd have enough for Jordan Spieth. So yeah, that's not going to be doable. We could perhaps go to Kevin Kisner or Mark Leishman, which I don't believe we can afford Kisner, but we can, just hardly enough. So you could make that type of swap if you wanted to, right? So you can play around with it. Just make sure that you're not going to have anybody that's meeting before the Elite Eight, and you should be making an optimal lineup. Let's go ahead and talk about this thing on the bracket again, just to reiterate this point, because again, I haven't heard this talked about across the industry. It could be an issue. When you're playing players from the same side and you're taking 4 of them from the same side, you have to make sure that the 2 players you're taking from the other side are not from the same 8th of the bracket, okay? So it's like the 5th time I said, I'm probably going to say it another 2 times here because there's going to be people that are burned by that this week and are like, I never knew that. It's like, yeah, because I guess other people just never hand-built lineups before. You would expect a lot of these quote-unquote DFS pros to have encountered that before, right? It's just strange. Literally no one's talked about it. I don't understand it. Let's go ahead and make a cash lineup now. So I promise we'd talk about a cash lineup because it's interesting. Now, with all the issues we have in GPP contests of trying to make sure we don't overlap, we don't deal with only having 3 out of the final 4 or something like that. In cash, we kind of want to embrace that. So like I said before, there's a real strategy to be had by taking just 3 players from 2 adjacent groups. You could try taking just 2 players from 3 different groups, right? So you could take like 2 players from this group, 2 players from this group, or maybe even 2 players from one of these 2 groups. Try and make sure that you guarantee to get somebody to the final 4 or something like that. There's a bunch of different hybrids of lineups that you can go with. The one that I would go with would be the 3 and 3, would be to take 3 players from one group, 3 players from another group. Now, I've seen a couple of people across the industry float the idea of, I believe it was this group up here, the one with Louis Oosthuizen, Paul Casey, Corey Connors, and Alex Noren. You can fit in like the bottom 3 players of this group and the bottom 3 players of this group into a lineup. And as long as I believe the players you exclude, I believe, are Tony Finau and Louis Oosthuizen. As long as one of those 2 players doesn't end up winning both of those groups, then you're like guaranteed to win in a cash contest. But there's a million different combinations of this you could go with. Personally, that's what I would be doing if I was going in cash, just because it almost guarantees you a win. Because other than that, in order to win in cash, you're just going to have to get 2 guys into the round of 16, which again, the average is going to be 1.5. We assume that every player has a 25% win rate, but let's go ahead and make a lineup that doesn't use that cheating formula, right? This doesn't take the 3 players from adjacent groups. Let's just try and take the quote-unquote best plays on the slate, which for me are pretty obvious. Taylor Gooch is by far my favorite play on the slate. I also like going to Xander Schauffele. I think both of them, just in terms of their win rate, they are well underpriced. So Taylor Gooch and Xander Schauffele. We have Taylor Gooch is over here to the left. He's in this 8th of players, so he eliminates the Bryson DeChambeau group and the DJ group from the rest of our lineups. And then our other player, where's he at? So the names are just so small on here. It's so hard to find him. Xander Schauffele is over here on the right side. It's going to eliminate the Louis Oosthuizen group from our contention. And same thing, of course, with Xander's group. So we have 2 slots filled with really high win rates. I think going to John Rahm could make some sense. Let's see. We could play him because he's not overlapping with anybody, but he's a little bit expensive. Let's see if we can go just a little bit cheaper. We could go to Patrick Cantlay at $10,200. I talked about him before as one of my favorite plays on the slate. He's down here in the bottom left, so he's not cannibalizing himself up there with Taylor Gooch. Let's go ahead and add somebody that's a little bit cheaper now, maybe in the bottom of the 7K range. A few other cheap plays I like is Tom Hoge. Tom Hoge's also in play, I believe. He's over here. at the bottom right, I thought. What? They're always moving these names on me. Jeez. All right, he's over here on the left, I suppose. Tom Hoagie. All right, so he's over here in the Billy Horschel group. He's also somebody that we can fit into a lineup. So let's go ahead and add Tom Hoagie there, right? So a lot of these are our core plays, which I based a lot of my core plays this week just on the guys with the highest win percentages, which of course are going to be some of the core plays I'm going to for obvious reasons. So these would be the 4 plays that I'd consider at first. Now we have $7,800 remaining per player. And we got to make sure we're not overlapping. So we filled up a lot of the left side. Let's focus on the right side of the bracket. We need to take somebody from this bottom side here. We could consider Will Zalatoris. It's one of my favorite plays on the slate. Or even Joaquin Neiman. So let's look at the pricing, see which one works a little bit better. You have $8,600 on Neiman and Zalatoris. Where's Willie Z at? He's $8,600 as well. So the same price, right? So just pick your favorite option there. Let's go ahead and add Joaquin Neiman there. And that puts us at $7,100. And now we got to make sure that we're taking somebody that's not overlapping. So if you wanted to take Sepp Straka, he would make some sense. We could go to Keith Mitchell as well. Let's see if either of them fits our lineup. So Keith Mitchell. You can see why having an optimizer is just great for this, right? That's why I'm going to be using an optimizer for most of my lineups. Also why I'm setting the 3-and-3 rule, because if you're not doing this, you'd have to be doing this for literally every single lineup. I went through all of them and I couldn't. Yeah, there it is. Keith Mitchell there at the bottom. So we can't play Keith Mitchell, right? You already have Patrick Cantlay in this lineup. Let's see. Cameron Young. It's not my favorite play in the slate. Let's see Justin Rose. I believe we can't play Justin Rose because we already have a lineup. Let's see. No, we can play Justin Rose. Okay. Yeah, so let's put Justin Rose in there. So this is the type of lineup I'd be looking at for a cash contest, right? So if you're not trying to do the 3-and-3 type of group strategy, if you're just trying to take the best plays on the slate, take it in an optimal fashion, this is the type of lineup that I would go with, right? It's got guys that have high winning percentages, good chances to get out of group play. And as long as you get 2 out of these 6 right, you should be cashing in your contest. So 2 ways to get it done. You can take the highest percentage guys, or you can try and just fix the game, try and avoid 2 of those guys in those 2 groups and take it apart that way. So let's go ahead and see who's down in chat, see if there's any questions. Chris Palmer is asking the question about cashing out. Good. Thank you for reminding me. So it's Cantlay, Xander, Garcia, Kisner, Homa. And the last guy in was $6,600 left. So let's see who we can fit in last with the $6,600. In terms of your question with Gooch over Homa, I would personally say so, especially because it would also fit that lineup based on the construction that I see there. You'd be able to do that. And if you went from Homa to Gooch, how much money does that save you? So Gooch is $7,700 and Homa is $77. So the same price. So it's not saving you any salary. So you're still left with $6,600. So yes, I would go to Gooch, by the way, but with $6,600 remaining, could you take Poulter's the question? Let's see, because Poulter's probably my favorite play, but we got to make sure that he actually fits the lineup here. Ian Poulter. Dude, I hate looking through this list. It is horrible because the names are so small. Where the hell is Ian Poulter? Is it Tommy Fleetwood and all those guys? Wow, I'm blind. I'm sure you guys see it. You've seen it for like 5 seconds now, but all right, he's over here. So Ian Poulter, he's matched up with Hoagie. You don't have Hoagie in the lineup, do you? You don't. Yeah. So you could play Ian Poulter in that lineup and you can make that work. So that's what I would go with. He'd be the guy under $6,600 that I take because he's not cannibalizing any of your other players there. And I would go to Taylor Gooch because Taylor Gooch is up here in this bracket. And you could take Max Homa as well. He's not cannibalizing it either, but just in general, I do think that Taylor Gooch has an easier group to win. For as much as Dustin Johnson is struggling, right? Mackenzie Hughes is a pretty good fit for this golf course. In fact, somebody I think might end up winning that group. So I definitely would go to Taylor Gooch there. But yeah, that's all we got here, guys. NSN says, what's going on, bro? Glad you went ahead and stopped by. Derek stopped by as well. Glad to see you here. And Chris Palmer says, can you look over the cash lineup that I had? Yeah, so I think we just did. Yeah, so we were good. Sorry. I didn't see your chat there until a second ago, but I like it. Yeah, I would definitely go with Ian Poulter as your last man in and maybe change Homa to Taylor Gooch. That's at least what I would do, but I do like that lineup a whole lot. But thank you guys for stopping by. Good luck with all of your lineups for this week. We will have a little bit of content coming throughout the weekend. I'm going to try and do something for the Corrales Puticania tomorrow. So look forward to that. Probably just going to be like my top 6 core picks or something like that. Not a full slate of content. If you're looking for the stats, if you're looking for actual projections, you want to be able to make lineups, everything like that, make sure to go ahead and join the Patreon because I have that up there. You'll be able to actually make lineups and all that sort of fun stuff. So do all that. Chandler said the link didn't work. Yeah, just message me on Instagram, man. I'll send you the Discord link on there. It expires after 6 days, I believe. So not a surprise. I was hoping that it would still be up there, but I'll get you hooked up there. But yeah, we'll have all that content to come, guys. I don't believe there's going to be Showdown this week. They didn't do it in years past. They have done it for the Ryder Cup, though, so we'll have to see what DraftKings decides to do. But next week, we do have the Valero Texas Open, so there will be content for that. It'll be the week before the Masters, of course, gearing up for the biggest week of the year. So really excited for that, and I'll see you guys later.